Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Localizing Climate Justice Conference Series Launch. My name is Vishal Jamalapati, and I am the co-lead organizer of the Localizing Climate Justice Conference Series and a co-founder of the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration alongside my esteemed colleague Nadine Clopton and the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration core team. I'd like to first of all thank all of the wonderful LCJC Series co-sponsoring organizations for their continued support and dedication to climate justice. You may have seen their logos cycling through the screen just a minute ago. This series would not be possible without your collaboration and continued support. Secondly, I would like to thank our 7 amazing speakers for taking time out of their busy schedules to present their inspirational work and thoughts on climate justice to all of us. I'm expecting to walk away from this event with a more nuanced understanding of not only exactly what climate justice is, but how we as youth and as global citizens can achieve it in our local communities. Finally, a big thank you to those of you who are tuning in live to the series launch on Facebook and YouTube, as well as those of you watching the recording for this inaugural event. We had about 300 different registrations from over 60 countries, and over 80% of those countries are from the global south. That is the sort of engagement that we need in these discussions. I'm hopeful that we as a global community can invest in the power of youth and incite meaningful political change based on the discussions that these events prompt. The LCJC series aims to connect a diverse array of youth activists, climate experts, and policymakers to ensure that our frustration at the current global state of climate affairs is justified through concrete political action. The stakes, as we all know, are far too high for us to sit idly by and allow our anger to fizzle out without action. Today's event and our monthly continuation of this series will hopefully serve as an educational asset that we can all use as a catalyst to approach our policymakers and leaders about localizing climate justice and ensuring that social injustices tied to climate change stop now. We must recognize the necessity of this political movement towards holistic justice on all fronts. In this moment in our continuing human history, more than ever, with Black lives being taken by their governmental systems meant to protect them, with this global pandemic exacerbating pre-existing inequalities, and with Indigenous communities being robbed once again of their land and environmental knowledge, we must find a solution. We need to recognize Indigenous communities and the significant role they play in our response to a changing climate. We must base our policy on empirical scientific evidence, and we must empower our women and girls with education and leadership. My hope is that this conference series will allow us to address these issues and craft local solutions in mutual collaboration across generations, sectors, genders, and races. I'll now just give a brief overview of today's event and schedule to give you all a better idea of how this time will be structured. I'll shortly be passing the mic along to my colleague Nadine Clopton, who will also speak briefly before introducing our speakers and moderating the remainder of the presentations and speaker panel questions. We will be allocating approximately half an hour to question and answer session, and we ask that you please enter all questions into the YouTube Live or Facebook Live chats when we open the question and answer session following the speaker section of this event. Following the conclusion of the Q&A session, we will adjourn the series launch live stream and open our LCJC breakout rooms to allow attendees and speakers to network and continue this discussion about climate justice on a more personal level. If you're tweeting about this event throughout the next 2 hours, we ask that you use our organization's which is @YouthClimateDeck, and the hashtags #LCJC and #GYTAD. You can find those in the scrolling banner below. Throughout the event, if you have any logistical questions or questions about the structure of the event, please direct those to either YouTube or Facebook Live chats. We have GYTAD core team members monitoring those chats who are ready to answer you. Without any further ado, let's get started. The LCJC series launch is now officially in session. It is my great honor to introduce my esteemed colleague Nadine Clopton, one of the most inspiring youth leaders with whom I've had the opportunity to work this past year. Nadine became a director on the Global NGO Executive Committee at just 21 years old, the youngest person to ever serve in this capacity. On the committee, she is chair of the Intergenerational Subcommittee. Nadine is an innovative changemaker determined to amplify the voices of communities and ecosystems that are often excluded from decision-making bodies. She co-founded and co-authored the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration, a set of 77 key climate policy recommendations that were crafted through a consultative process with youth climate activists around the globe. She is currently leading the GYCAD Core Team Strategic Development Initiatives. For the past 5 years, she has served as the youth representative to the United Nations for the Australia-based NGO Caring and Living as Neighbours, an NGO dedicated to catalyzing better health outcomes for children with chronic conditions, especially in Indigenous communities and resource-poor settings. This past spring, Nadine completed her master's in environmental policy at Lehigh University as a presidential scholar, devoting both her studies and advocacy work to just sustainable development. Outside of her advocacy efforts, Nadine is a classically trained opera singer, plays the ukulele, and loves spending time in nature. She is currently based in White River Junction, Vermont. Without any further ado, Nadine.
Thank you, Vishal. First, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the incredible array of speakers here today for lending your time, perspectives, and energy to making Mother Earth a better place for all of us. And second, I have to extend a huge thank you to Vishal, my awesome co-organizer for this event, and the entire GYCAD core team for their creativity, flexibility, and trust throughout this whole process. Additionally, I'd like to extend a thank you to our co-sponsors for their support and to all those who are here in attendance with us for sharing your time. Most importantly, I'd like to honor the traditional stewards of the land where I am, the Abenaki tribe, and where everyone else is calling in from. I encourage you to take a minute to look up who the traditional stewards are of the land that you're sitting on, and take time to honor their presence. So now, more than ever, it's imperative to nurture the well-being of not just the individual, but also that of the community, the entire ecosystem, both social and environmental, at multiple scales from a small town to the planetary level. The COVID-19 pandemic and the omnipresence of systemic racism have elucidated long-withstanding painful truths about the powers that be and how our systems consistently fail to adequately serve Black communities, Indigenous communities, and people of color. Understanding this reality, how can we, rather than rushing back to normal, explore ways in which we can infuse resilience, justice, sustainability, and accountability in all facets of governance? The emphasis on climate justice for this series was intentional. Justice is a critical lens through which to see the issue of climate change. Without it, BIPOC communities are often left out of the climate discourse entirely while bearing the heaviest burden. Climate justice is a more regenerative, holistic, and comprehensive approach to climate action. It begs the question, how can we ensure that our solutions do not create a deeper web of challenges for those whose cries go unheard in decision-making bodies? Communities have unique needs, innovations, cultures, environments, personalities, and dynamics that we must always keep in perspective. Climate justice is necessary not only for community well-being, but that of ecosystems as well. Our ecosystem services across the globe are severely undervalued. Why is it that a tree has more value dead than alive? Why do we scramble to protect our remaining coral reefs once they are already in critical condition, realizing far too late the role they play in coastal protection and biodiversity? Our intention for this event is to strengthen the bridge between the two worlds of climate discourse, global and hyper-local levels of engagement, in order to better understand the role that climate justice plays in informing best practice policy. And so that brings me to talk about the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration, which is a set of 77 key policy action items co-created, defined, and refined by young climate activists from around the globe. The intention of the GYCAD is to serve both as a knowledge platform and as a climate policy toolkit that empowers young people to make climate action a tangible reality in their home communities. Following the first ever UN Youth Climate Summit, if everyone remembers when Greta took a boat across the Atlantic to be present, the GYCAD was initially created by climate activist attendees to serve as an independently crafted outcome document for that convening in the absence of a formal outcome document. And subsequently, it spread like wildfire throughout global youth climate advocacy channels for further input. Through a series of public consultations in communities across continents, both in person and digitally, the GYCAD is constantly evolving to best reflect the perspective of Earth's members and citizens. I urge you to read the GYCAD and host a dialogue in your community about, one, which policy recommendations resonate most with you, and two, both the social and ecological context of achieving this policy in your community. Especially when we're operating at a global level, It's critical to approach policy and systematic change with a sense of curiosity about the dynamics within a local context. I always find that by asking questions, you walk away with much more answers than from prescribing solutions. Questions such as, what's the unique social context of a community and its constituent parts? Who makes up the fabric of that community? How do they relate to the world around them? The local forest, urban environment, social conditions or stigmas? Where is power concentrated? And more importantly, where is it not? What are the values of the various individuals, power players, citizens, and institutions within the community? And what is their dynamic? For this event, the duration of the series and beyond, I hope that those who are working at the global level, and I encourage them to become deeply connected and well-versed in the most local levels of the larger whole, and to listen deeply to the human experience and to practitioners of community resilience on the ground doing transformational work in community. I am most consistently inspired by Indigenous communities as the keepers of ancient wisdom about living in harmony with Mother Earth and the most delicate parts of an ecosystem. Those who live in reciprocity with nature are natural leaders in shaping best practice environmental policy. Especially in a time where we have exceeded numerous planetary boundaries and are on course to exceed even more of them, the integration of localized knowledge about the ecosystem into policies and institutions that hold decision-making power is critical to our survival as a species. The Indigenous relational perspective of Mother Earth as a living, breathing being must make its way into decision-making bodies, colloquial language, policy structures, and education as global citizens. My personal mantra over the last few years has become, with the capacity to act comes the responsibility to act. In a world riddled with injustice, we must devote ourselves to cultivating the highest good where we are. In closing, I would like to emphasize that justice is best achieved when we approach policy with a series of questions rather than prescriptions. Thank you for your collective passion for this cause. Kindly let me know how I can be a partner for change, and I hope this is the beginning of an exciting ongoing dialogue. To which effect, it's my sincere honor to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Rhonda Munir. Dr. Munir is an environmental and climate change expert with over 25 years of experience in the fields of environmental management, consulting, and working in the private sector. She holds a master's degree in environmental engineering from the Imperial College of Science and Technology in London, England. She served as a senior advisor to the Egyptian Minister of Environment, where she was responsible for international cooperation files addressing climate mitigation, sustainable development, and environmental management. During her tenure at the ministry, she also served as the director of the Green Climate Fund, where she oversaw climate financing in Egypt and supported local projects that respond to the challenges of climate change and advance Egypt's sustainable development. Currently, Rhonda is the Climate Change Policy Manager for the British Embassy in Cairo, leading on the climate plan for COP26 and advising post on all climate change and green projects in Egypt. Prior to moving to Egypt, Rhonda worked and lived in Canada, where her experience spans environmental consulting as well as multinationals with Schlumberger and Talisman Energy Incorporated. Having worked in North America, Japan, Europe, and the Arab world, Rhonda brings deep technical expertise and extensive exposure to international climate efforts home to Egypt.
Thank you, Nadine, for that introduction, and thank you, Vijal, for inviting me to this wonderful and dynamic conference. I'm always excited when I'm around young people because this is the future. You guys are going to be the policy makers, decision makers in the coming 5-10 years. So before we hit our massive goal 2030 or 2050 for carbon neutrality or reaching climate adaptation mitigation, you guys will be responsible for all these decisions. So I'd like to thank you all. And as you can see, my background is also nature, trees. I love nature. That's my connection. That's been my passion since I started my career. And the most important thing is that you have a passion for what you're doing. You believe in what you're doing. So climate change and environmental management, we have to take care of our environment. When I looked at the topic, I didn't prepare a very intense speech today. I'm just going to talk based on what I know, my experience, and I would like to give 3 key messages here for our young people, because I'm so excited. I'm happy that there is attention now, that there's all this effort done from you guys and from the world now after the COVID-19 hit everyone. So the first thing, when I would look at the climate justice, the title of your conference, and I'm so excited about this. It's a new buzzword, but it's not only the buzzword. This is a huge goal. I would say, dream big, work hard. You guys are going to make this happen. How and when? This is the question and the challenge. When we say climate justice, this is a huge topic. It varies from every country, from every continent. Jobs, economic situation, sustainable development, all these, we have to think about all this stuff. So my 3 key messages really today for the youth and for the world is the number one: we will work together. Without working together, without involving our civil society, we won't make this happen. That's every single stakeholder in this. It's not only the policymakers, it's not only the decision makers, even if it's high on our topic and we have the rules, regulations, but without involvement of you guys, without involvement of the private sector, of the public situation, everyone around the globe would be involved to appreciate nature, but also to look at our needs. If you're going to talk to people who are living with poverty and you talk to them about energy transfer, transition, and how can you invest in that, this is a different scenario and dialogue from a developed world where the GDP is different, the situation is different with the jobs, with the poverty, with all their circumstances. So it is all about the dialogue. Yes, there is other key messages here. So working together. And from that COVID-19, we've all learned one thing. We're all heading towards one goal. It's our safety. It's our health. We want to stay safe and in good health in order to face the consequences of COVID-19 and how we're going to deal with it. So we learned one thing in that lockdown, that everybody had to connect with nature. We took our bikes in our lockdown. There was a huge change. And this is what I call, and this is my first message, is the culture shift. Do we need to do a culture shift in order to change our way of living, in order to take care of our environment? Yes, this is one thing. How can we do this? This is the challenge. You guys are going to make it. You are the future. So if we all work together in that sense, do a culture shift, look at all our technology, how we're going to use this, how we're going to reduce our CO2 emissions, how we're going to take care of our biodiversity, all nature. This is our first goal and message. Secondly, how can we make this happen? Is it through policies only? No, I believe technology. Remember the days 20 years ago when we didn't have these magnificent phones? We couldn't even connect like what we're doing now. We are now everyone from different parts of the world, and we are all in one meeting, in one virtual meeting. So this is technology. How can we do this? Capacity building and awareness. And this is what you started doing now. So with awareness, there's a lot to do. You need to go talk to your community, but more work to be done in technology. Now we're looking at 5G. Now we have all this technology in hand. When we talk about, for example, energy transition, there's the solar panels, there's still the challenge of the storage, the batteries. So we still have a long way to go. Who will make this challenge happen and be realistic? It's the youth. It's the new generation. That's my second message, is how to turn this big, nice buzzword, climate justice, which is working together, to maintain a green and resilient recovery, especially after COVID-19, and having a culture shift. I would use this as the first message. How to make this happen is through technology, through capacity building, and through awareness. Policies are always there. It's a key. So I wouldn't leave it out when I say technology transfer, when I say awareness, capacity building. It's through policies. It's through recognition, and leaders have to recognize the importance of climate change and climate action. And that's happening one after the other. The third thing is nature-based solutions. And this is one of the themes. When I talk about the CUP themes, we are talking about transportation. We're turning into electric vehicles. We're talking about energy transition. And this is a huge topic. We want to stay away from fossil fuels and move to renewable energies, wind, solar, etc. We're looking at also nature-based solutions. Climate finance is another key theme that is very important for our upcoming, for the run-up for the COP26. So what is nature-based solutions? Are we going to use more technology? Are we going to care for our environment? There's more to be included in technologies when it comes to preservation of water, agriculture, biodiversity. So my third key message here is to care more for our environment through nature-based solutions. And this is the new term that we're looking into. Finally, I'd like to give one more hint about how are we going to reach the net zero carbon. This is very difficult at the moment. With all the efforts done, are we looking into planting more trees? Is it reducing the carbon? We will still have some carbon in there. What are the economics and the dynamics to implement this? How can you convince people and developers when we talk about green construction, for example, green roofs? There's more cost associated to that. People are so busy now with their losing their jobs, the economic situation. So with that said, we still have to look at technologies which are smarter, which are more green. And this is doable. This can happen only with our efforts together, only with the youth. More technology, more into our think tanks, and involving the people. Like, you cannot be sitting in a room in a conference talking about all this wonderful buzzwords and all these projects in implementation and stuff, and ignore the people that are just outside the door. Open your door, talk to people walking on the street. How much are they connecting to nature? How much are they connecting that we're saying could really happen and benefit their lives? That's the key message. How can you benefit your future generations? And you are the future. So I encourage you all to keep on with your momentum. I'm delighted with all what I've been hearing now with the youth. And we will be helping you, decision makers, policies, educators. You talk to private sector, you talk to communities, but see what is more adaptable to their situation. We should focus more on adaptation rather than mitigation, the future, the coming years. So I would close here, and I would welcome any other questions from you. And I'm very happy to be in this kind of dynamic move in conference. I'd like to thank you for giving me the time, and I will close here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for that wonderful, moving speech. I appreciate your presence here and everything you had to share.
Thank you.
And so next, I would like to introduce Hita Lakhani. Hita is a climate educator from Mumbai. She has a master's degree in environmental studies and resource management from TERI University in New Delhi. She has been active at the local as well as international level since the UN Climate Change Conference, COP21, in 2015. Hita is a firm believer in the power of the youth in grassroots as well as international processes and policies. She educates school students on climate change and aims to bridge the knowledge gap on climate science as well as international processes among the children in India who are at the forefront of facing the impacts of climate change in the coming years. Through her work, she aims to create changemakers who will take knowledge-based action in order to combat the climate crisis. She is the current global focal point for Youngo, the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and has been critical in helping us to get this put together. So thank you, Hita, and can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you, Nadine. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and thank you, Vishal, for the invitation. I think I would like to sort of agree with everything that Rhonda said just before me right now. Absolutely 100% on the point. We definitely need a lot of innovation in technology. We need policy change, but at the same time, we need to realize that when we talk about climate change, it's not just an issue of the right policy. It's not just the issue of how many degrees warmer, or are we going to prevent, or are we going to reach? I think it's very important to realize that the path we get there is as important as the destination when we talk about the climate crisis, because this is where the impacts are global. You cannot decide who is affected, who isn't. There is no way to sort of protect somebody from an ecological impact when that happens. So I think we need to realize that the path is extremely important, and this is why when we talk about climate justice, this plays a central role when you talk about fighting the climate crisis. Climate justice means very different from different parts of the world. You could talk about climate justice in terms of a developed nation versus a developing nation, between the global north and the global south, saying that the countries who have developed, who have um, in part led us to this crisis as we are in today, but due to the development, due to the industrialization, they should be the ones paying the price for it, and it shouldn't come across the developing nations, or it shouldn't come across the global south to bear the brunt. But unfortunately, I think we need to look beyond just that. We need to definitely realize when we talk about climate justice, it's a lot more than paying the price, or it's a lot more than who does what. It's also realizing that climate change means different for different parts of the world. It means different from different sectors of society. So if you're a young person, or if you're a young indigenous person for that matter, your life is going to be a lot more affected than a young person from an urban or from a well-to-do economic background, for example. Versus, if you're a young woman or girl, versus other genders, especially the LGBTQI community, who have been marginalized for years for different reasons, but they also come at the forefront of the climate change scenario when we're fighting the climate crisis. And this is extremely difficult when we talk about privilege, whether it is financial privilege, whether it is a privilege to education, whether it is just privilege to be able to live in a part of the world that could be slightly less affected to the climate crisis in the years to come. So I think this is extremely important to realize. And as young people, we're talking about changing the current system. We're talking about integrating voices. But we do need to realize that in our fight, we need to be as inclusive as we can as well, because at the end of the day, we cannot become a model of the system that we're trying to change. We have to make the change within ourselves. We have to make the change within the systems that we're trying to work within our networks, within our communities. I think we need to realize that when we talk about climate justice, when we talk about fighting climate change, we have to be as inclusive. We have to ensure that we can get people from the marginalized communities, get indigenous voices, get voices from the global south, get voices from, the island states who are actually at the forefront of facing the impacts year after year. So I think we need to be as understanding about it, but also we need to act on this, which is what I think when I can talk a little bit about Yango, which is the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC. And within the UN system, within the UNFCCC climate change scenario, we actually have a voice at the table. So why are we still talking about youth not having a voice at the table? Why are we still talking about young people's voices not being heard? And I think this is where the issue lies. The UNFCCC system is where decisions can be taken only by country. So even though you are part of the system as a youth, you are part of the official system, you still don't have a decision-making mandate. And this is where the issue lies. This is the problem that needs to change, because young people need to be making the decisions for their future. We cannot leave these decisions to people who are way, way, way older to us, because they're not going to be here to face the impact of the decisions in the years to come. So, as blunt as it may sound, this is the bare truth, and this is what we have to realize, which is why it is highly important to integrate youth voices and youth from across sectors. Again, not just privileged youth who have the chance or the opportunity to be at these kind of conferences in person. It is sometimes quite impossible for youth from the global south, especially when you talk about rural youth from the global south, to be able to be part of these conferences. So it's very, very difficult from island states, or from even it's not just a global north versus global south debate. It's across the world, and there are very few young people who can be part of these decisions. And when we do these sort of consultations, or when we ensure that you're talking on behalf of a constituency or on behalf of the global youth, your views are as open and as inclusive as they can be. So ensuring that you've spoken to young people from different parts, you've ensured that their voices are gone into the document or into the speech that you're going to make, or whatever that may be. Which leads me to talking about my work back home in India, which is about educating young people. So what I realized as I started going to these conferences from 2015, year after year, is that young people or students, my friends, we were never taught about the climate crisis in school. We studied a little bit of environmental science, but it was extremely, extremely outdated. And even today, what they study is very, very different from what the actual scenario is. So how do you expect the youth of India to fight for their future, how do you expect them to even be prepared to know what's coming if they're not educated about it? So we're not asking for financial resources. We're not asking for capacity building. What I was saying was we don't have the basic knowledge. We don't have the basic awareness, the basic education to even understand what's going on. Which is why you cannot expect a lot of young people to be part of the international negotiations. You can't expect them to be part of fora or be part of youth groups that work internationally because they're not aware that these things even exist. So what I wanted to do is try and bridge this gap, and it started very, very organically where I was talking to a teacher and she said, why don't you come and talk to my students about their experience? And it was, a group, I think of about 10 or 12 students. So it was very, very small. But this formalized, a little bit, and I started thinking on how I would want to structure that and things like that. So built it up slowly to have sessions with schools, which are, action oriented, which are education, but they're also fun for kids because at the end of the day, if I had to go and give them a lecture on climate change, why would they want to listen to me a second time? So definitely, this is it's good to be innovative, but it's also important to like ensure that we're giving them the tools to then decide what they want to do. So if they have the basic education, if they have the basic knowledge, and then they have in a venue of things or areas that they could engage in the field of climate change, you can then expect youth to either become innovators, you could expect them to become change makers, you can expect them to become policy makers. But if I don't know that this issue exists, there's no way I can expect the young people to lead the change. So I think definitely it's all interlinked. So I think when we talk about climate justice or the climate crisis, about youth action, it's a big web of how interlinkages and about how things are moving very dynamically through the streams. It's really not silos. It's really not just youth action versus policy engagement versus advocacy or whatever. So it's completely it's a mesh. It's like a spider web, and each strand is extremely important. And I think we need to empower the youth to understand this and to be part of this web together. So that's what I'm going to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hita. And I deeply appreciate your points, especially on education and the importance of providing that education so, children can have a basic understanding with which they can mobilize to then turn into climate action. So deeply appreciate your work and all you do. So next, I would like to introduce Dion Shakuza. Dion is a youth advocate for sustainable development, working on advocacy, engagement, and participation, primarily focusing on climate change and renewable energy. He has been serving as an official Namibian youth delegate to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. And there he also forms part of the youth constituency, Yungo, where he supports introductions and inductions of new members, following negotiations and assisting interventions in youth positions. Dion is also part of the Abu Dhabi Youth Voices of young activists working on climate change. Previously, they co-organized the first ever UN Youth Climate Summit, where the GYCAD was born. And during the summit, they organized sessions, set the agenda, and formed part of the team to select 100 out of 7,000 applications of global youth attendees. Dion is also very active at the regional level, forming part of the African Youth Climate Movement, to further strengthen and build other synergies to advance the global and regional youth climate architectural framework. At a national level, Dion is also a member of the National Climate Change Committee of Namibia, following and representing young people at the Intersectoral Committee. He is a co-founder of the Namibian Youth on Renewable Energy and also advises the Namibian Youth Coalition on Climate Change, co-founding the Namibian Youth Biodiversity Network, and is currently the country coordinator for the AU Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program and the Youth Network. So without further ado, I turn things over to Dion. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Nadine. Can you just confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, you're all good.
Am I good?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Perfect. Greetings to everyone. As introduced, my name is Dion Shakuza, youth advocate from Namibia, and I'm glad being here to share some of my experience in this space. To begin with, just looking at the definition of climate justice, or at least what it means to me, certain keywords come to mind, such as ethics, equity, sustainability, and justice. And as a young person, obviously, you also look at the responsibility of older generations to leave behind some type of adequate and sufficient amount of resources for us to build our own development therefrom. And you realize that our carbon budget has been reducing since the Industrial Revolution. And I think some studies have been done where they show that people living today can only emit at least an eighth of total life emissions in comparison to somebody from the 1950s. So that's very worrisome because it threatens and plunges on the right to development of future generations. Climate justice to me is also unpacking the set of norms and individual behavioral change. And I think if you look at the entire spectrum of the climate negotiations, this intersectoral asymmetric space has not been fully tapped yet. And one can see it evidently by the groups that are marginalized within climate justice, how they've been faring in the last years. For example, we know the role of the industries through the relative and absolute emission targets. They also have an entire constituency that they use to lobby and push their agendas. Further, we also know the role of the state and civil society. However, if you look at the broader groups that I mentioned now, the marginalized ones like women and the gender constituency would only get a gender action plan at COP23 in Bonn. The indigenous people would only get a platform also, I would believe, the same year. And the young people, it's only in the last 5 years that we've actually been operationalizing the intergenerational equity. And last year at COP26, we saw some of the largest number of young people attending an international conference. And hence the big strike that we had last year at the UNFCCC, which also forced change of regulations. And that's just to highlight the pressure of the climate justice marginalized groups starting to take ownership of the space because they've somehow been sidelined for long. Climate justice obviously also deals with various cultures and the disproportional impacts of the different groups thereof. And therefore, it's a conversation that would require massive participation and inclusivity as well in order for us to understand the common but differentiated responsibilities and in particular the respective capacities in regards to young people in my case. Breaking down climate science into domestic national issues is something I believe climate justice is able to do, because if you look at reports from the mitigation sector, from the adaptation, or even things like the transparency framework, it's a bit clear as to what we want. However, when you come to climate justice, if you have to explain to somebody the importance of environmental justices, you'd realize that we don't have enough quantifiable literature, and often the people who speak on behalf of those most impacted are not always necessarily themselves. So I think there's a big gap there to bring climate science down and translate it into a socio-economic conversation so that people can actually understand why we are talking about what we're talking. And this leads us to the next point, which are the principles of climate justice. Just basic reading, you would find some work done by Mary Robinson's Foundation. And these principles, I believe, are very important when we're talking about climate justice, given the variety of different groups involved. One of them would be respect and protecting human rights. And I'd like to go as far back as the Magna Carta, which kind of like gave human beings the emancipation of freedom, followed by philosophers like John Locke talking about the inalienable rights of human beings. And I think a mix of that would give birth to then the UN Human Rights Declaration. And this is more or less what gives us jurisdiction to push for climate justice. And perhaps on that matter, I'd like to argue maybe we need a Magna Carta on climate justice at this point in time and see how the future generations would appreciate such a move. Coming down to a local level, I also think we need to bring in the ministries and departments of justice. I've noticed they are so far-fetched and far divided from the climate space, and often at a state intersectoral body or space, you'd find more the science-based ministries like Ministry of Environment, Water, Agriculture. Rarely do you find Ministry of Justice, who actually has the mandate to ensure that targets that the party has committed to within the NDCs are also met at the national level. And it also brings a stronger impact amongst the law community to understand that there's an essence of climate justice that requires them to particularly pay attention to and start advising their governments thoroughly. That could be seen in the form of creating now from the NGO perspective, maybe environmental law societies that would be complemented by an environmental tribunal, because I've seen a lot of electoral tribunals to show how ready we are to quickly solve democratic issues. I've seen traditional authority tribunals, but I think an environmental tribunal would be especially important in developing nations where majority of projects are to take off, especially in the fossil-based processes, such as fossil fuel coal factories and stuff like that. And I think perhaps these tribunals could look at the environmental impact assessments and strengthen them, and also equip young lawyers with climate knowledge so that they could also, we could increase the arsenal we need in defending and protecting and preserving our resources. We could also look at issues like poaching and illegal hunting, over harvesting, especially in developing nations where the poorer people are forced to start foraging the little bush that they find in order to either create energy, produce energy for themselves in order to cook, or take some of those fruits that or products that come from the harvest, such as camel thorn seed pods, and then sell it on the roads. The danger is that most of the time they harvest while these species are still too young. And I think it will be very important for us to have a space that takes care of that. And human-wildlife conflict is also an issue of justice, not only for human beings, but also for the wildlife, because for long they've been owning these spaces, and then our land use change is starting to displace them. And the lack of availability of resources, such as water, is also creating the conflict. So I think there's the issue of justice for both sides, because coexistence, I think, is the future of our relationship with nature. Another point I'd like to highlight is effective intergenerational climate governance, because there is the intergenerational component that is right now only restricted to dialogues, youth engagement, and conversations. And I'd rather much like to advocate for a climate governance framework between older and younger people, because if you look at the UN fact sheets, you'll find that under 13% of all global parliamentarians are under the age of 35. So we cannot speak about climate governance without asking, but if you don't increase our representation, how exactly are we going to co-govern these resources? Further, most important is probably the education component. I really like how the previous speakers also spoke about it. And in the negotiation space of climate change, we've got the action for climate empowerment, which is, I think, Article 6 of the UNFCCC Convention, and should be Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. And this article is more or less the only spaces where youth have expressed themselves. At COP23, we as the young people there successfully managed to negotiate a workshop for ACE, which was due to be held only by parties and such representatives, and they argued for youth participation, because majority of people who can educate and who need the education are young people, and we thought, how could they have a workshop without us? And that's one of the times I've seen us getting some type of support by pushing for youth agenda. So I also wanted to talk about education in the sense that we should also respect the difference between school and education, because not all education is in school systems. And this brings me to the point that we're doing a really, really good job on epistemological breakdowns of climate science, but we somehow need to do better on the metaphysical range of it. And this is where the indigenous communities come in, and the reciprocity spoken of by Nadine in connecting with nature and some type of biomimicry or imitation of nature. In order to understand nature, we somehow have to apply her theories or at least systems of operation. And I think that leads us almost sometimes into a spiritual domain. If you take a look at the Vemba biosphere in South Africa, what some of the communities would do to protect the resources is apply a metaphysical argument and say, that is a holy place, nobody should go there. Or if you go there, it's taboo, this and that would happen to you. And I think we have to build on that type of arrangement as well, because the environment is quite difficult to comprehend just using logic alone. and the indigenous communities can help us there. But if you look at the research being done, we go down to these communities, talk to the experts, do the research, and then we finalize it and put our names to it. And I think like those are the experts. But when the expert is presenting, it's a complete different face. But I'm like, why can't that person themselves come and tell us what they experienced, which we just learned to quantify with using the scientific method? So I think that's also lacking, especially on the metaphysical part. There's some low-hanging fruits we could use. Human beings already love nature to some extent, but it's very biased. Same with animals. The only challenge is they love what they have domesticated in nature. And we need to teach them to extend it, because a human being would have love for pets, like cats. But this person would probably not be concerned with the protection and preservation of, let's say, a cheetah or a lion. And I'm like, but your pet cat is just a smaller version of the big cat. If you are domesticating cows, buffaloes would be also a link there. So I'm like, plant species, certain plants that they love to keep around themselves, they have a little green garden, they keep it clean, they water it. And I'm like, you're already somehow subjected to nature, and you already admitted to like, here in my country, due to the apartheid inequality, we don't have access to land as much as we should. And that makes it difficult to protect what you don't own. It's fenced off, it's private property. And what some of the people have done here is you would find, especially the older people, they live in very poor neighborhoods, but they would have a small little garden, household garden that they keep. And I'm thinking to myself, that's the small piece of nature they have, and they're saying something. They're basically saying that we admit and acknowledge our connection with nature, but somebody needs to help us bring us closer. Ending on education, I'd like to argue for research and development centers on climate justice to be in the South, so that the experience and proximity to it, because perspective is quite expensive to collect and go on the ground and so forth, but if there's proximity between the centers and the communities, the subject of studies, it would make a much stronger case. About to finalize, I think the other one is the nature-based solutions that was mentioned by the British High Commissioner, and I fully agree on that one. I in fact want to argue that sometimes we call it nature-based solutions, but it's still our way of thinking that we apply using the elements or components of nature, like trees and stuff. And I think we should start to humble ourselves a little bit more and actually understand how nature also looks at certain things, because we're not the only ones who experience particular disasters. And nature is also forced to adapt. So, for example, here at home, in the African setting, we would always judge the coming of rain by looking at birds and seeing if it puts its nest up the roof or if it's on the tree, and we can understand if it's seeking shelter from some type of strong wind. And them also traveling up and down from the global north to the global south. I think in the early warning monitoring systems, we could work a lot with nature-based solutions like birds who can help us and let us know early on before these storms arrive. One can see it in the COVID, where some people are using dogs to try and sniff out the COVID-19 virus. And I think we could think about that in our climate space. The very last one is on the youth agenda, which I think I would like to congratulate all of us for what we've done so far. However, I'm a bit not entirely satisfied, because I think we're doing a good job on the streets, but we're starting to slack on the sheets. If you look at the Paris Agreement, take its operating toolkit, the Paris Rulebook, and you look at the text in there, you'd find that we are not featuring. Hita spoke about us not having a mandate in the UNFCCC. I think it's time we fight for the youth, for example, to be an agenda item that just needs to be discussed, because often when something lands on the table of the executive decision-making body, which is the COP, something tangible often comes from it. And that's one of the things I've noticed the youth are not doing good at. And this is why I will comment the Youth Climate Declaration, because that gives us a quantifiable understanding of how to approach it and put ourselves in the sheet at national and local and other levels. The other component is maybe an intragenerational equity. Apart from intergenerational, I also think there's an intragenerational equity in terms of responsibility for us as current young generations to those who are yet to come, and also holding each other account as young people, looking at all the institutions that are serving young people. And before, the way we treat the older generation in terms of accountability, we should also apply it to ourselves, because it's not every young person that understands the importance of the responsibility that has been put upon our generation. This means that a young person who lived 20, 30 years before us could do way more than we can. And we're right in between. So that means we have to do a lot of compromises and a lot of sacrifices. And I think I haven't seen such discussions running around that amongst the youth at that level. And yeah, I think that's more or less my point. And I'd just like to end it by saying that climate justice needs to really be more bottom up, because let's take the development assistance that comes to developing nations in terms of greener transitions and low carbon economies. You find that sometimes they bring funding to a smaller nation. However, if you look at that funding, it comes with very huge collateral requirements. Like in my country, to build a photovoltaic solar system would cost us almost around a 5 megawatt, that is, that would cost us around almost $30 million. And yet they would still say you need to provide 30% collateral. Now imagine asking a young person for 30% of that. So this transition almost doesn't mean much, which brings us to the point by, there's a friend of mine called Celeste Renaud. She is a postgraduate student at Oxford's Environmental Change Institute, a South African, and she did, I think, her studies on climate justice. And in particular, she had one thing she said plainly that I like, and it was, an energy transition needs to meet the challenges of inequality and unemployment in order to gain political buy-in. The reason why this is so important for us in the global south is that some of us have already come out of an apartheid inequality system, which still has its legacies here. And when you bring now the green technology and you still keep people out, you're just creating a radical group that would start arguing that we don't have to go green. It doesn't work for us as Africans. It's just stalling our development. So it's important to have this discussion because people would feel left out. And that's why for the green transition, we need to ensure that workers are retrained, young people are educated. We give infant industries like renewable sectors to the locals more than have multinationals come in and invest in the green industries from emerging countries under the pretense that it's going green, but it's actually just a business investment in a foreign country. And we've seen the clean development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol has given us lessons to learn from. But I think the youth are needed in all of these conversations because otherwise people will be left out. If you take the NDCs, when we quantify and do the accounting methodologies, you find that some of the developing nations have more methane emissions than they do carbon. And then that methane would most probably come a lot with the nitrous oxide, probably come a lot from the agriculture sector, which most of them depend on. Now, if we don't have this conversation, it's gonna have a really tough mix. So thank you very much. I would just like to end it there and wish everybody good luck.
Thank you, Dion, for sharing your perspective. It's fantastic to hear just, the perspective from the continent and understanding what's going on, especially relative to, there is such a difference between how climate is addressed in the global south versus the global north. And it's always important to keep that at the forefront. So thank you. And next, I would love to introduce Marlo Baines. Marlo is an 18-year-old from Boulder, Colorado, and is the youth director of Earth Guardians. Born in Seattle and raised in the mountains of Evergreen, Colorado, she has had an intrinsic and deep love and appreciation for wild, open spaces and places. Marlo has been an integral member of Earth Guardians National Council, Rising Youth for a Sustainable Earth, and is honored to serve as youth director. She previously served as Earth Guardians Global Crew Director, a role in which she actively connected with youth leaders across the globe about their initiatives and resource needs, while providing educational materials and support. As youth representative for Earth Guardians, she has worked tirelessly to push back the frack in Colorado, which fundamentally changed the charter of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission charter from one of fostering the responsible development of Colorado's oil and gas natural resources to placing a priority on the health and safety of Colorado citizens, wildlife, and the environment through regulation and tighter local control, considered one of the most progressive in the nation. You go, girl. Marlo has participated on youth organizing committees for Alliance for Climate Education, International Indigenous Youth Council, U.S. Youth Climate Strikes, Fridays for Future, and Future Coalition, and has collaborated with 0 Hour, Extinction Rebellion, 350.org, Our Children's Trust, Colorado Rising, and others. Marlo has presented alongside Bernie Sanders and met with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi as one of the diverse coalition of youth demanding climate action from Congress. As part of the effort to bring awareness to the youth climate strikes, Marlo was recently featured alongside 18 youth climate activists in the Facing Extinction campaign by Patagonia. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Powerhouse Marlo Baines.
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you, Dion, and the others who've spoken before me. As you've heard, my name is Marlo Baines, and I'm currently residing on Arapaho Ute and Cheyenne land in Boulder, Colorado, United States. I'm a poet, writer, and the youth director for Earth Guardians. Earth Guardians is an intergenerational organization with youth at the forefront that inspires, informs, engages, and invests in the impactful communities of over 300 youth activist crews across the world. We provide the platform, resources, and the collaborative opportunities necessary to elevate their voices and strengthen the positive impact they are having in their communities and the world. Although Earth Guardians isn't necessarily involved in national and international policy making, we are working on supporting youth in their authentic and potent leadership styles and building strong community. We are putting on the pressure to build and advocate for the world we want to see. I got involved with Earth Guardians when I had my first realization of what people power could do. But before that, I had been met with the climate crisis back when I was in 6th grade. It was 2013, and between 2013 to September 2020, there's been 98 climate disasters within the US that have had more than $1 billion in damage, according to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atlantic Atmospheric Administration. Over 4,108 people have lost their lives to climate disasters. The total sum cost of dealing with the aftermath is estimated to be $598 billion. The climate crisis is raging around us. We feel smoke and toxic air from refineries and extractive industries within our lungs and eyes. This is the very existence that we are living in. But do not let that be the driving force for what you want to see within the world. I got involved with Earth Guardians my freshman year. It was 2016, before the 2016 elections, and I had the privilege and opportunity to be a part of the Standing Rock movement to protect the water up in North Dakota. Here I realized and discovered the power and potency of people power and what we could do when we came in collaboration, and that it scared the people that were in power. We have made great strides to help solve the real world problems of the climate crisis, but we need to continue to do better. So from here, returning to school with these new understandings, I needed to do something and anything about the crisis. Real people and communities had been affected, and it seemed nobody was doing anything about it. A few months later, I joined the RISE Youth Council within Earth Guardians, which was known as the National Youth Council a few months later. And that summer, I went to a training that absolutely changed my life. I realized that there were people around me who wanted to see and hear from me, but also that we were working in collaboration together. This is what I wanted my life to be. So after coming back and a quick switch from public school to independent studies, I became fully invested within my Earth Guardians work. I began the Earth Guardians Boulder crew within my community, organized and led many of the Colorado 2019 climate strikes. And when I was appointed to youth director last fall, I built the Earth Guardians Youth Council that stands to lead the internal and external visionings of Earth Guardians. What Earth Guardians is currently working on is, sorry, I'm looking at my notes, is supporting 65 million youth people to register to vote within the United States election for this November. In August, we held our first event, which garnered 100,000 views and 17,000 youth voters reached. This year, we released our online platform, the Community Resource Center, that served as a tool to connect our global community and also provide trainings on leadership, facilitation practices, and much more. To get involved within Earth Guardians, you can click on our website, earthguardians.org, and look up our crews. Earth Guardian Crews is an area where you can start or join our Earth Guardian Crews so that you can provide and build your own leadership style and also your own community. Earth Guardians will support your leadership training. In turn, you will go back to your community, take what you're passionate about, and using that to fuel local and on-the-ground projects there. Without further ado, though, I'm also a poet and writer, so I would like to close with a poem. This poem is from my book, The Little Black Book, and this is the poem called The Final Exposition, but I will only read a portion at the end. Yes, our countries look different by the numbers, names, and social statistics, but I see my country and cry for the pain never seen by the economist, politician, president, and billionaires. Yes, people are angry and turning words into action called inspiration, handed as flowers to the girl who feels like giving up with her hoodie back on in the back of an underpaid teacher's classroom. Systems are failing, and that means renovations. Stops being scared of death because rebirth is a part of a millennial-old system. Yes, we are waking up in masses of poppy fields that wink black eyes of beauty, interconnected like stars sprinkled in galaxies far on another island. We are different and yet similarly perfect in imperfect cohesion. My country hurts because maybe it has a disease they do not want to treat, but we, the people, as the body, need to acknowledge the trauma, be the blood, nerves, and bones to knit it back together. Our people imagine the country isn't that lovely. The idea of a competition deconstructed into ideas that are made into minds that can change and call for facilitated collaboration. I am back in the current moment. And he says, your country is perfect, and I smile because I know it isn't, so I respond, we are human, therefore what is a country? And I get back to work smiling because we are creating change globally. And I just wanted to finish with, we are living in really hard times. We are seeing our world beginning to disintegrate around us, and yet at the same time, you have to realize how much power you have within yourselves. It can feel lonely at times, but realize you have peers and adults around you who are supporting you and your voice. Continue to rise up, continue to stand for the future you want to see, and never give up. All right, I'll pass it off to the next person.
Thank you, Marlo. That was absolutely beautiful and really, really moving. I appreciate all of your work. And it's so great to see, someone who's so young with such a tangible, powerful impact. So keep going. And next, I would like to introduce João Henrique Alves Cerqueira. João is a Brazilian climate activist. He was part of the Brazilian official delegations for the UNFCCC's COPs 22, 23, and 24. In 2019, he was one of the winners of the Green Ticket Prize to participate in the Youth Climate Summit and Climate Action Summit at the United Nations headquarters. He is co-creator of the communication project on the climate crisis called CICLI and works as institutional relations director on the advocacy project Clima del Eleição, sorry if I butchered that word, which is tackling climate in the Brazilian municipal election. He is also a fellow in the Social Good Brazil Network, the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Youth Local Pathways Program, and the Global Shapers community at the Curitiba Hub. So without further ado, João, take it away, and thank you for being with us today.
Hello, everybody who is listening. I want to thank you, Nadine, for the introduction, and Vishal for the invitation, and express the honor to be here telling some of my stories among so many incredible guests that are here with me at the opening of this conference. So I want to start introducing myself a little better, and for that I need to bring you the context of where I speak. I am part of a network of amateur journalists and climate activists called CICLI that have people from all the different regions in Brazil. We travel by bicycle around Brazil, listening and documenting stories of people in our country who are at the forefront of the climate crisis and who face other environmental injustices. We are doing this to learn from those people and also to highlight their role as true climate leaders. We believe that only when we show the faces behind this global phenomenon and share real inspiring stories, we can generate the empathy needed to mobilize more people to engage in this agenda. And we do this using bicycles to prove that it's possible to travel large distances without emitting greenhouse gases on the way and without contributing further to this crisis. So since 2018, I cycled more than 1,000 kilometers throughout Brazil across 6 different states. Along the way, I heard hundreds of real stories of resistance against this global crisis, but also against several other violences that people experience in their territories. We heard traditional communities, indigenous people, peasant movements, and communities impacted by major environmental crimes that happened in recent years. One example was my trip to Brumadinho in the state of Minas Gerais. There I witnessed the mining wasting dam that broke in 2019 and took not only the lives of 270 people, but also the life of the entire Paraopeba River, essential for agriculture and fishing for hundreds of people. And it's not only that, for the indigenous people of the region, the land and the river are fundamental spiritual entities, and these beings are now struggling to survive. There, I also met people like the organic farmer Cedar Borges, who told us about the difficulty of dealing with increasingly intense heat waves and having access only to contaminated water for farming. You probably already know that we are going through one of the worst political periods in our recent history in Brazil. At this moment, we have in the power an authoritarian, anti-democratic, anti-scientific, and anti-environmental group. Those people see our biomes and our forests only as resources to be explored and traded in the international market, and sees the people who defend those same forests as enemies of the state. During the coronavirus pandemic, we saw this government taking advantage of the vulnerability period to destroy the environmental protection agencies and the resources of the environmental sector. Today, we see the fires that happened last year repeated, now in greater intensity. Those fires are started by big farmers, and the current president, Bolsonaro, encourages them to do so. It's a government that acts criminally against their population and environment. Meanwhile, the communities need to fight every day to defend their territories from the interests of predatory extraction that cut down forests, poison rivers, and pollute the air. In this context, where the climate crisis intensifies progressively and where the government is the biggest enemy of its own people, we need to emphasize the importance of territorializing climate justice. Many communities and territories that we visit are dealing with the impacts of extreme weather events, and they often don't have access to the most basic public service, such as sanitation, health, and education. Even though on those bicycle trips, those people have honored us with their stories, their friendship, and their traditional knowledge. Places that are really far from major climate funds and major debates on the climate agenda. In those territories, at the front lines of climate change, we saw the most creative and inspiring technologies for climate adaptation. Innovation is happening there. Adapting is a necessity to continue in the territory, to guarantee livelihoods and the maintenance of social and cultural life in the communities. This is the case of Miss Diva, a community leader we met on a trip to the island of Superagui in the state of Paraná, who created an association of women to empower working women who lost their income after the erosion of the coast of the island caused the fishing of seafood to decrease substantially. The association was essential to guarantee the autonomy of women on the island, despite its main source of income have ended due to climate impacts. Also, traditional territories are the areas with the lowest rate of deforestation in Brazil, even lower than the conservation parks. And finally, the agriculture practiced in those territories is sustainable, based on ecological processes and without the use of chemical inputs that poison the soil and the water. Unlike the conventional agriculture that is supported and sponsored by the oligarchy that is currently in power and is totally disconnected with the natural process. The strength and the resistance of those climate leaders is greater than the more of 500 years of colonialism that we spent and still remain in Brazil. Their fight is stronger than the suicidal greed of a small group of old and white men who makes decisions for us and is stronger than the addiction of large global corporations in exploring the natural resources in our territories. Every day, I dedicate my work alongside thousands of Brazilian activists because we want that this dark period of our history passes as quickly as possible and that we can build a regenerative path from it. This will only happen if the communities that protect our forests and our climate are part of the decision-making process, so they can have the leading role in transforming their traditional knowledge into strategies to protect our nature and boost conservancy all over the world. For me, climate justice in Brazil involves changing these dynamics of power and finally accelerating the process of decolonization that hold us in an extractive, genocidal, and ultimately suicidal development logic. And I know this is a big challenge for us to do locally. It will only be possible if it is also done globally. This is why we need to work together in a diverse network of movements and urgently. Only then, overthrowing those ignorant and authoritarian leaders and finally carrying out the long overdue historical repair that we need to do with traditional communities and native peoples, that we will be able to live in a fair and healthy system, both for the people and for our planet. Obrigado. Thank you.
Thank you, João. Wow, for your critical work on the front lines of climate justice and for your bravery in speaking up against injustice perpetuated by the oligarchy that you currently live in. I can't imagine what life must be like in Brazil right now, and my heart really goes out. It's similar to the situation in America, unfortunately, but with a lot more natural resources at stake, which is scary. So thank you for doing what you do and for dedicating your career to bringing attention to the realities of Indigenous communities. And with that said, I would like to introduce our next speakers, Parmita Sarma and Mazen Mukhtar. Parmita and Mazen are co-founders of the Akshar Foundation, which is a nonprofit based in Assam, India, and they have developed an award-winning education model that can transform schools into centers for sustainable development. And I must say, their work is some of the most inspiring that I've encountered in the last year of advocacy work. It's really it's amazing. So I'll let you guys take it from here.
Thank you, Nadine. So hello everyone, and thanks to Nadine and Vishal for inviting us with all these great speakers. At Akshar Foundation, we believe that climate justice and universal quality education go hand in hand. We have developed a new education model that transforms schools into centers for sustainable development. Our philosophy is learning and earning, so that underprivileged children can earn enough money in school to stay in school and not be forced into manual labor. So for example, we employ students as private teachers for younger students for up to an hour every day under the supervision of adult teachers. This way, we got all of our students to abandon manual labor and come to school with over 95% attendance. We even got dropouts back into school. Kids that were showing early signs of antisocial personality disorder, violence, drinking and smoking, bullying and stealing are now responsible community leaders, so decent, confident, and hardworking. 4 years ago, they were learning the alphabet, and now they're preparing for 10th grade examinations. They're model students. More importantly, they're model citizens. And on top of that, the younger students get daily one-on-one private coaching, which has helped them overcome the lack of educated parents so they can make rapid progress in the curriculum.
After school, at-risk teens also earn money by working in the school office, by installing and maintaining the school's solar power plant, in the carpentry workshop making furniture for the school, in the school animal shelter, landscaping in the school tree planting and gardening enterprise, and at the campus recycling center. Twice a week, they collect clean, dry plastic from homes and businesses around the school and teach people to stop burning or dumping their household plastic. They also upcycle the plastic into building materials called eco-bricks. Our next move was to ask the parents of our students to send their plastic on the school bus with the kids, but almost none of them would do it. So we told them the school would start charging fees now, but they can pay their school fees in plastic. And ever since, we've had 100% compliance from the parents, and every student brings a bag of clean plastic waste to the school recycling center every single week. Before lockdown, we were collecting about 10,000 units of plastic each month. Here's a 2-minute video I want to show you to give you an idea of the Akshar education model.
We decided to collect plastics from our students because that was the immediate problem. We heard reports from the students that they would burn plastic almost every day. And in the winter months, all the students gathered around it for warmth. So then we made it compulsory.
We have made this structure by using ecobricks.
The students are also getting more conscious now. They are aware that plastic is bad for health, burning plastic is bad, and they're talking to their parents about the ill effects, and like that actually they're starting to understand. We hope that they have enough skills, so that they can stand up on their own feet. So we are trying to develop a model where we go from schooling to employment. So we started our model school in Assam, India in 2016, and now our focus is on replicating the model in government schools. In 2018, we started working to implement parts of our model in a primary school in Delhi. And it was a great success in transforming troubled students into model students. Now we are in talks with government leaders to implement the Akshar model in up to 1,800 schools in a city called Gwalior. Government teachers from there, as well as from many other schools all over the world, including to charter school teachers from the US, will come to the model school in Assam to receive training in the Akshar model. Our goal is to help every school evolve into centers for achieving the sustainable development goals, where students work on the problems directly every day and not just read about them in a textbook. And we need the support of activists all over the world to urge their leaders to do the same.
What if every school in the developing world incorporated a recycling center where students design machines to make new products from recycled plastic? What if every school had an animal shelter, a solar power plant, a tree planting nursery, and a student-run health clinic, all of which incorporate their classroom learnings? Hundreds of millions of children all over the world could get a great hands-on, skill-based education, and at the same time, the serious problems we all face can be addressed on a global scale. Right now, our school has become a center for food relief in the wake of the COVID-19 lockdown. Senior students are acting like aid workers, identifying houses in their neighborhoods with food shortage and sending us information and pictures. Then our teachers delivered 2-week food ration kits. This one school delivered 2-week rations to more than 15,000 people in the city. If every school evolves like this, students can make a real impact on the climate crisis and get the best education in the process. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Parmita and Mazen. It's always such a joy to have you present and hear just about the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you, and I hope to see that work expanded and really scaled around the world, because it should be. It's fantastic. So thank you. And thank you to all of our incredible speakers today for coming and sharing with us your work. And thank you to our attendees for tuning in. I will now turn it over to Vishal to help us go through the Q&A and choose some questions from the chat that we can ask our speakers.
Thank you so much, Nadine. And thank you again to our wonderful speakers. That was, it's so great to see such a wide array of perspectives and work and thoughts on climate justice. This was really a fantastic event. So thank you all again for joining us. We're now just going to move into a brief question and answer session. We'll go on. I'm thinking we'll probably take up about 15 minutes, contingent on how many questions come in. So for those of you streaming in live from YouTube and Facebook, go ahead and put any questions you have for specific panelists, our panel as a whole, myself or Nadine, into the chat right about now, and we'll just move through questions as they come in. So I'm going to go ahead and add all of our panelists onto screen now. Panelists, you can remain muted until you are addressed by Nadine, who will be moderating the questions. All right, our first question right up here. Nadine, take it away.
Sure. So our first question is, what policy solutions, in the panelists' opinions, are most critical to implement in order to address climate justice? So feel free, jump in, unmute if you have a response that you'd like to share.
We can take this. So obviously we'd say education, not only because students can make a direct impact on the climate crisis, but our students are future voters. They're going to graduate eventually, and they're going to go out and be expected to elect responsible leaders to make a difference. Maybe if we had better climate education, the group of politicians that we have leading us right now might be more likely to actually address the problems.
Hi, if I may come in here. One of the critical opinions for implementation, yes, thank you very much for adding that education. It's a key, it's a starting point. But also in some places where we can do education, it's awareness, it's the capacity building, and more for new educators to implement innovative ideas on how to build back greener and more resilient. So how can we change our way of living and thinking? How can we include this? Technology always surprises, and that's my vision on how we're going to see this. We don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, in 20 years with all the advanced technologies, and that could be a key in our policy solutions. Another thing is a key point is having climate as a priority on our list when it comes to implementation, when it comes to priorities in each and every country globally. So having climate as a priority in our list would really advance that action. And with your efforts, again, you are going to be the policymakers and decision makers in a very short time, believe it or not. We almost think about 2030, 2035, 2050, that looks like a long time. And when we used to say this in the past 2 decades, in our time, the past 10 years, the past 20 years, you guys were not there. You were not recognizing the importance of climate change. Now you're on board. So I think this is a very good starting point. So when we used to talk 10 years ago and say future generations, everybody was so concerned about their current and immediate need. If I need an iPhone 4 or a 4G or a 5G, how I can make my living, my job security, economics, projects, investments, all this sort of stuff. And the youth were not involved at that time. So down the road now, today, with all the smart ideas that you have now, with all the experience, with all the ambition that you have, I think this is an amazing moment for us to recognize that you're on board. You will be leading very soon. So I think that would be the solution. Thank you for your efforts. Thanks.
I think we'll go to the next question. Okay, so from Svan Fridor Mura, creating youth governance bodies was discussed earlier. Do we have any examples of this critical idea from history or in the present day? How could we practically create these bodies?
Yeah, I think I can take that. I mean, there are quite a few examples of young people who are working, whether it's governance, whether it's working with governments, etc. There are youth climate councils, for example, in a few countries that have been working very closely with their governments. We have a network of young people who are part of these youth climate councils or have started youth climate councils in their own countries. How it works is it depends from country to country, of course, and it has to be localized to what your government is probably willing to accept and how you can sort of work together. But I think more or less it works towards the idea of ensuring that when climate change decisions are taken, it's the Youth Climate Council that will advise the government on these kind of decisions. Will advise them on how sort of, for example, youth consultations can be done or how youth voices can be brought across from different parts of the world. So it will be this youth council that will ensure that they're reaching out to other young people within their country from different parts of the regions of the country, ensuring that you get a holistic youth voice when you're talking about it, when you're talking about climate change and talk about solutions. So it's not just a few handpicked young people who might be in the purview of the government or whatever, or some sort of decision-making platforms, but it's a more holistic approach. And of course, this can be tweaked on what is available or on what is feasible with governments. Not all governments are open to working with young people that closely, so this is a challenge. But I think there's definitely a starting point, and there are a few examples, really good examples at this time. So, yeah.
Also, from just an organizational example, Earth Guardians built their youth council this past year, and it's been such a beautiful success because we're getting our youth leaders to go on and be organizing in the different projects that Earth Guardians is a part of. But it also comes with challenges such as, the intergenerational work and collaboration that comes into play once in a while. So how we used our council structure is that there was no different roles within it. We all were like equals, and at the same time, sometimes I think that the adults, it's an interesting balance between not really understanding that structure, and yet at the same time, we have come to see that it's such an important piece of our organization. So I definitely advise you guys into looking at different council structures, and ways in which that you can build it within either your community or within your different organizations, because it provides such a unique perspective and it creates such a safe space to collaborate and come up with the solutions and actually implement them in real time. So.
Thank you both. And I think also regarding this question, something that I've given a lot of contemplation to is the idea of including youth within just normal governing structures. So even like outside of having youth councils, outside of having spaces where young people can come together and say, yeah, this is what we want, this is our perspective, is just a critical importance of making sure that young people are involved in decision making at the highest levels, that they're consulted, because after all, it's our future that decisions are being made about. And so I think it's critical to demand of our policymakers and from the small community level to the global level to say, hey, young people have a really strong voice on this. We are innovative. We've got like amazing skill sets. Why can't we be part of this conversation? So I think going forward, we should be a little more assertive in, making sure that our voices are heard, not just outside of the decision-making spaces, but within them as well.
Thank you, Nadine. And one good opportunity is sharing in conferences like the COP. So I invite you and look forward to see you all in COP26. And then the other part is also what we're doing now is you're connecting from different parts of the world, learning experience, who's doing what, how can we learn from each other and move forward and connect and be heard, as you said. So I think we're right on track. Thank you.
And to build off of that point, thank you everyone for those wonderful answers. We have a question from Clara T. how can the youth better ensure that their voice is truly being heard and not dismissed by policymakers in regards to climate policy? Marlo, you were talking about this, not to put you on the spot, but if you have an answer to that, I would really like to hear from Marlo and then Joao, because the situation you're living in right now, Joao, where the government is not listening to you. Same with you, Marlo. What can we do as youth to make sure we're heard?
I would say get really clear on what you want to bring forward and do not waver from it. You can see sometimes that policymakers will do this kind of like wishy-washy thing. But if you can continue to say, no, this is the solution, this is what we see on paper, this is what the scientists are saying, you can see that it really puts the pressure on these different policymakers, and you start to see the shift. Not as fast as I think as youth we want to see, but it is something, and don't give up, don't waver. Be clear on your topic, be clear on the solutions that you're proposing forward.
Thank you. This is great. Can I add one little thing here? Is the startups. I've seen a lot of youth in young generations doing startups. A lot of it is recycling, all towards climate and environment. So this is a good proof to show to the governments who are not really embedding this into their decisions and stuff. Just come up with solutions in the actual doing of what you're convinced. And I think you will convince the whole world when you do this. I've seen amazing examples with startups worldwide. So that's a starting point.
Yes, we probably would add the importance of making pressure, and in all the different ways. I think the activism plays a important role in making pressure through against policymakers, so they feel that they need to respond, because sometimes the institutional places doesn't actually allow us to participate, and most of the times here in Brazil, most of the times those places are used to be just like to validate what is already being discussed, and we are actually not able to participate on those processes. So I think the pressure is really important. Unfortunately, I would like not to make pressure in every process, but still it's really useful here.
I think also a big intention behind the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration was also ensuring that young people, when they say, I want climate action or I want climate policy change, is providing policies that they can, go ahead and say, okay, these are the things that I want. Because I find so often young people are so passionate about the climate and they say, like, I care so much, but it's such a big nebulous issue that often when they're on the spot and they say, okay, so what sort of climate policies do you want? People just freeze and don't know how to respond off the top of their head, because it's such a big issue. And so, for us with the GYCAD, it's, okay, here's this document you can take to your legislators and say, here are 77 policies that I would like you to read and address. Let's talk about 5 of them. And that, puts us on a level with the policymaker where we can have a discussion about, like, okay, what does this look like in our community or our state or our country? So I'd encourage everybody, as the little scroll bar says below, to check out the GYCAD and share it and use it, because it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to all of us collectively. So use it, share it, by all means.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yes, baby steps, just take it one step at a time and make it practical. Provide a solution, a win-win. There has to be a win-win, because you have a different way of thinking now from whoever is doing these policies and stuff. So how can we bridge the gap and talk the same language? Just give them one example, one solution. And again, startups is an amazing idea to do this stuff. And you've got loads of specialties under environment and climate change when we say this. It's the recycling, oil, all sort of things that I'm sure between all of you, everyone would have a different idea. So turn your ideas into a practical, hands-on. Show the product. That's the result. Yeah. Thank you.
So our next question comes from Sweet Voice of Harmony, and it says, what would a climate just solution look like for the not in my backyard problem For example, in siting a trash treatment plant? That's a great question. And I think, you know, that question also speaks to fundamentally why climate justice is important more so than climate action. Because climate justice allows us to say, okay, whose backyard are we taking this problem and dumping it into? Whereas climate action is kind of like, yay, we solved it, and now BIPOC communities are bearing the burden of, you know, dealing with the issue that we've apparently solved. So yeah, curious to see what you guys have to think.
I know within Colorado, we have a huge issue with fracking and extraction, extracting resources for fossil fuel and natural gas. And something that we saw within Colorado is that when we work together with different communities, and especially the most impacted communities, when we would go to hearings, we would make sure to continue to emphasize that it's not just about moving it to another county, but it's actually about putting a ban, putting, you know, strong regulations to make sure that they are not impacted, and it's, you know, or that, you know, our community isn't impacted, but the ones, you know, across from us are. So I think it's just continuing to show up and to say, no, we actually want to ban, and it pushes them to, you know, continue to make those policies to make sure that their constituents are actually lined up with what we want to see, and making sure that it's not just put onto the other communities that do not share the same privileges as, you know, maybe I in a more white affluent community does. So just making sure that your voice is heard, I think, is very, very important, and making sure that you're continuing to advocate for those that are going to be most impacted and not forgetting them within the conversation, actually bringing them to the forefront of the movement.
Okay, so
this, I got you. I got it. So this one, I wanted to ask this one specifically to Dion. This great question: is a just, sustainable system possible within the framework of the current system, or do we need to start over and reimagine our systems of governance and economy? In your presentation, Dion, you sort of talked about that conceptual level of government not allowing youth, particularly to get work onto the sheets. So if you have an answer to this one, go ahead, and then anyone else, feel free afterwards.
Thank you. I'm trying to just freestyle this one because it just hit me. I'm thinking perhaps we should first acknowledge that we have inherited a very unequal world. Literally came from a world where people had to fight for their rights of movement, their rights of association, their rights of speech, and stuff like that. And so therefore, to try and solve a problem with the underlying system that is unequal would be foolhardy. And I'd perhaps suggest that this is where the elements of leapfrogging would come in. The future of work that the UN Labor Organization has put out, the fourth industrial revolution principles that come with technological advancements, and also the evolution of governance, in particular politics. Because this question, in a nutshell, is basically talking about governance structure, the way I see it. And I think perhaps it's a question of, since we cannot change the world overnight, we start with the low-hanging fruits. I would say use your voting right properly. Vote for the leaders that do not subscribe to that old modus operandi of development and governance, so that they can take charge as soon as possible when they get into office. I don't think a just world would be possible under the current regulations of systems of operation. I would rather say that this is a task for the future generations. This is what we have to do. And I think this is the point of climate change. Climate change found itself inheriting human struggle. They just came out of colonialism and stuff like that, slavery. And then now another existential threat is existence, which is climate change. And after each challenge, the human beings start engaging differently. They apply new rules of engagement, and then they kind of like evolve. It's funny how our algorithm is like that. We first have to hit the wall, and then after hitting the wall a couple of times, we realize, oh, let's fix it, and then we move forward. And I think that's more or less what you're asking. And I think for a green system, we cannot use the old methodologies. We need to use the principles of sustainable development adopted at Agenda 21 and the UNFCCC, and also the community-based regulations. I think That's how I'll answer it, because I can't decide what's justifiable for Latin Americans or for Chinese. It will be different as well for different countries. And so it's a question that requires more listening before acting.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, just before we move on to the next question, real quick, from my point of view, I think we definitely need to reimagine because the current system has been one where we are normalizing greed, we are normalizing inequality. Our economy is one where capitalism is the only way to go. It's one where it's okay to tread over someone to make yourself feel better or to get ahead in life. And I think this is what needs to change. We definitely need to reimagine systems. We need to reimagine how how borders were created, for example, because when we talk about climate change, it's a global issue. It is not something that is pertinent to different parts or to countries. So we definitely need to reimagine systems. We need to reimagine the way we've been functioning over the years. But again, this can't happen overnight. So and change is going to be extremely painful. It's not going to come easy. And I think as young people, we need to be the agents of change, like we've been saying it. Youth are the change makers. But when actually putting it into action, it's not an easy task, and it feels real nice to be called a change maker. But what we're actually doing is restarting how things have been working, reinventing the wheel, trying to rethink on how can we do this better, how can we have justice in the true sense of justice, which is also when it comes to climate justice. So I think we definitely need to rethink, and we need to do it fast.
Absolutely. So a question from Bill Metler to Parmita and Mazen. Do you have plans for how to move communities away from disposables altogether?
So ideally, we'd like for them to give up using plastic altogether, but we realize that's a very difficult thing to ask, especially those low-income communities in our society, that they should, take that step first. Essentially, it means they won't have access to things like, biscuits and bread and a lot of groceries that they buy. So I would say climate justice means that people from middle class and upper class families, they need to make that sacrifice first before we start demanding those things from low income communities. If we have any students who decide to go plastic free, we don't demand plastic. We just demand that they participate in the recycling. We've had a case of a student saying, who was living with a middle class family, and they had given up plastic. And then we say, fine, you don't have to bring in plastic anymore if that's really the case. But the reality is, for these low income communities, a lot of things that we see as everyday items, which may be luxuries for them, like biscuits and snacks, they have to buy in plastic packaging.
So briefly for all the panelists, how has COVID-19 impacted progress towards climate reform in your countries? I know I can speak on behalf of the US. Climate reform is not a priority on our national government's list. And I think it has empowered our existing government to, embolden the extractive industries even more by saying like, oh, now we're in a crisis. So I guess you can do what you're doing without any form of checks and balances, which is terrifying. So that's kind of the state of things in the US. Let's hope that changes soon.
It's
Yes,
actually
and
the
it's
same in
probably.
India.
Oh, sorry. You can go.
No, I said it. Sorry. It's absolutely the same in India, where we've flouted government environmental laws. We've weakened policies. We've actually opened 41 new coal mines for power plants over the past couple of months. So we're definitely not leading in climate justice or climate action. But yeah, it has definitely increased the youth participation. It has ensured that young people are more aware, voicing their concerns, taking this quite seriously. We had strikes across the country today for the global climate strike. So it's definitely changing the perspective of young people.
Yes, I was only going to say that in Brazil it's the same, actually. So the government took advantage that the media is looking to the coronavirus pandemic to dismantle several environmental laws. So yes, that's it.
And I'll speak for what I've seen in Egypt with all the challenges that they're going through with economic reforms in COVID impact. Yet I think the ambition towards climate is still there. There's more work done with respect to waste management, action with biodiversity, climate change. So it hasn't been dropped. In fact, it's been taken as one of the positive things with what they've seen, the changes. And they trying to get food security and health and safety included with more of education and technology in there. So yeah, it's been very optimistic. So we'll see what will happen towards COP26.
Go Egypt.
Yeah.
I guess on a positive note, I think COVID-19, because everyone's just been pulled inward, has allowed people to slow down in some cases enough to really take time to interact with nature. I know a lot of people that I know here in the US, they really just were so embedded in this culture of like work, 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 work without any time for life. And now they're really talking about how they're slowing down a lot more, taking time to observe Earth's natural cycles. Like I have friends who are like, oh my God, now I know when the full moon is, or now I get to go on a walk in the forest, and that's way more fulfilling. And so like for me, even because I grew up in Pennsylvania and just recently moved to Vermont, the ability to slow down and not be in a constant pressure cooker has given me the opportunity to really look around and just observe and appreciate Earth's natural cycles and how we're all part of that. So I hope that it's done that for many other individuals around the world, and that maybe if policies aren't changing as fast as we'd like it to, that at least our own individual perceptions of how we relate to nature will change a little more.
Thank you, Nadine. And exactly, I assure you for all this. I live in Cairo, and a lot of people have recognized well, it's a big city, it's a polluted city, and then luckily, like if you're up on I'm on the 17th floor, and one day I've seen the tip of the pyramids, and I said, this is very clear. We have very clear skies now. People in the lockdown hours were going out for walks and cycling, which I've never seen before that much. So back again to that word, a culture shift. We were running, racing with our lives, with the technology, with the phones, with the cars. Now, also, we have to remember one thing the amount of carbon reduction that happened worldwide because of no airplanes, that was massive. Cars. I've seen Cairo as a city with no cars during the lockdown. It looked beautiful. It looked green, as opposed to before when it's so polluted. However, we cannot live like this. This is just a stage, but it was good for us to recognize and stop for a moment in our lives from that race to see what's happening. And back to that word, culture shift. I remember the last conference I was speaking in right before the COVID, and we were talking about culture shift, and people were like, yeah, you listen, but you don't really absorb it and you don't feel it as much. Now that it happened, and not only for one country, but over the globe. And this is, again, we will all aim at one objective. Whether we're going to remember this, it's going to be a new style when you like after that COVID thing, when you start your life again, it's going to be different for sure. And this is where I see it's very positive towards our goal for climate change and for pollution. So it will happen. That's the culture change. But again, going back, how can I balance? You need to have a balance between this and economics, the challenges that people will face, because you have to make a living. So this is the new challenge that we're going to face, and how to build back greener, as we always say, more resilient post-COVID. But it's there on every single country because they've seen it. So if I return back to airplanes with the full capacity, or even 25% as we are today, that carbon percentage will start to rise up again. But we've seen already that there is a change. We will put every effort to make that change happen towards climate and reduction of CO2 emissions. So I would say I'm very optimistic. With every single challenge, when you move from one house to the other, there is a lot of effort put into that. So imagine you're changing the whole world, you're changing the whole perspective, the way of thinking. Fossil fuels has been there for years, the coal. Phasing out coal in different countries is not only just phasing out coal and period, that's it. It's a whole community that relied on this for years and years, starting from the mining, full life cycle of that product. And that goes back to life cycle of each and every product we're using and abusing in this world. The world of construction, the new houses, the greens, I can see all the backgrounds behind you. The material that we're using in our floors, in our drywall, all this will change and is changing. So it has been there for the past few years, but it will change probably at a faster rate now that we've seen it, we've lived it.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and I'd love to go panelist by panelist. So starting with Dion and ending with Conita and Mazen. So for all panelists, what is one sentence of parting wisdom you can offer us on climate justice? And I'll give you a minute to think about it.
I'll go first. We all need to work together.
Yes, just jump in if you think of one. Yeah.
I'd like to say we need a paradigm shift towards climate consciousness. Don't be shy.
I guess on my end, it would probably be curious and don't be afraid to ask questions, because questions often get us to, conversations that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
On my end, I'd say, climate justice goes against the status quo, and it's hard to get past that initial hump, but I think it's something we need to do.
I think I would say speak up. Speak up for the marginalized, speak up for your community members, speak up for those who don't have the opportunity to do so, and ensure that you bring their voices with you to the table.
Wow. Yes, mine would be always put people and the planet before the profit. Always, always, always.
I'll just do a really quick 2 sentences, which is also a poem. So now we rise with wings on our back, unfurled and knit together. We fly forward, never stopping, believing in a better world despite everything, odds or none. We will fight and seek justice, listening with open hearts and mind. Our world is special, and we will do everything to protect it. Oh, the sacrifice of childhood is
And
so
on that
great.
note, what a great way to end that. Thank you all for putting up with that relatively difficult question just at the end. What a great way to end there, Marlo. Thank you for that beautiful 2 sentences. I'm going to go ahead and remove everyone else from the screen and close out our event for today. I just want to say thank you again to all of our wonderful speakers. And I think this sort of discussion-based question and answer session was extremely productive. So thank you, Nadine, for moderating and introducing all of our speakers, and for your wonderful work as well. And This was extremely enlightening, and I hope that all of our attendees, both of those of you who are able to join us live, we know it's difficult to join longer meetings, as all of us are either learning virtually, working virtually, living virtually, essentially. So thank you all for joining today, and those of you watching the recording, we'll be sharing this recording on our website and using it for future events. We will now go ahead and adjourn this LCJC Series Launch session and move into the Zoom discussion portion. If we have 5 people show up, if we have 3 people show up, I still want to meet a couple of our attendees. Speakers are welcome to join as well. The information is scrolling across the bottom here, bit.ly/LCJC rooms. That will be displayed on the end screen of the conference as well. As we previously mentioned, we will be continuing this conference series on a monthly basis. We hope to see you and your friends and your community members return for next month's event, where we will be featuring a new set of inspiring speakers. So please stay tuned for LCJC series updates on all of our relevant social media pages and website. Our website, once again, is gycad.org. That will also be displayed on the end screen. And thank you again for joining. The LCJC series launch is now adjourned. We will see you in approximately 3 to 5 minutes in the breakout room session at bit.ly/LCJC series. Thank you all. We'll see you.